Obviously, first off, shout out to our sponsors. Some really good folks on there. Lots of some of the rock star cores, the folks that are doing really well as some banking schools and some just generally sharp people like our friends at Loan Pro, Bankers Bank of Kansas, FinPro. I'll actually be out with Loan Pro next week at the Salt Flats in Utah, so I'm pretty excited about that. There's going to be I hear there's a home run derby. So if you're there, watch for me in the home run derby. That'll be fun. One fun one. So I always like to show a little bit of something from the data side, and this is one I had the team work up this last week, that I thought was really kind of interesting for our conversation today. So we all know the news cycle, especially with some of the bad names and the consent orders, and a couple of bad actors that sort of got everybody in trouble. It's definitely put a little bit of a hush on BaaS and embedded, but behind the scenes, we're all talking more than ever, louder than ever. Things are humming, and so I want to put together a little bit of data that just kind of demonstrates that. So what I did was we took all banks below 10 billion and then all fintechs, right? Fintechs meaning non-chartered, not vendors, right? But direct to consumer business, sponsored fintechs. So today we're just over 150 sponsor banks running just close to 700 fintechs. And you can see if you looked at the App Store downloads, community banks versus fintechs and the number of downloads, the downloads are absolutely through the roof on the fintech side. As you expand that, you can run that peer group any way you want, and the story doesn't get much better. So, depends on which frame you're looking through, right? I like to look at it and say there's a sponsor bank behind every fintech. So, at the end of the day, good for the banks, but obviously a different way of doing things. So, anyway, I just wanted to show that and also note that behind the scenes, a lot of conversation around BaaS and embedded. And I'd say kind of the one I've been harping on for a while now that I continue to see this trend line. It's less around what we've always called fintechs. It's less of the challenge or the chime, and more of the brands, right? It's Home Depot, it's 7-Eleven, it's folks like that are doing really cool things. And I think that's starting to come downstream to slightly smaller folks as well. So without further ado, rather than introduce you, you're too cool. I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Okay, I love it. And I also see a couple of familiar faces on this call. So hello to the folks who I've already met. But hi everyone, my name is Kalyani. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Kobalt Labs. But my personal background is I actually was an AI researcher for a number of years in academia. So I researched kind of actually some of the pre-GPT models at Stanford for a number of years. And then I went on to work at Apple Pay. So I was building some automations for like the Apple Pay, Apple Card, their fraud team. I was the head of AI for a health tech company, which not in financial services, but they faced very, very similar set of problems, is what I'll say there. And then left and now the CEO of Cobalt. So we're an AI company and we actually automate a lot of the processes that I experienced firsthand.
Really cool. I'm obviously not only super excited but intrigued on the topic, right? And I know we've got a lot of friends and banker folks in common, and you guys have things actually in market, and we're going to talk some about that today. So I'm excited to get started if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, totally. So I got a couple of slides, but as you know, we'll keep this conversational, but just a bit of structure
Keep us on task, or me. That's okay.
to make sure, we don't go off the rails,
There you go.
which I tend to do. Okay, so can you see this?
That
Okay, great. So you all obviously know the title, so just moving forward a bit. I already talked a bit about me. Maybe another fun fact is that obviously everyone on this call has heard of ChatGPT, but the concept of a GPT, this idea of a generative pre-trained transformer, like is multiple years old. And back in the day, we were all just playing around with different kinds of GPTs in different ways. And so it's interesting when people talk about AI as this like single ChatGPT moment. It's been coming for a long time. And even back then, there was so much value that people were already getting. So not only is it not purely just coming, it's here now, and it actually has been around for a while, which I think a lot of people don't know. And I think the thesis for like this webinar today and what Tanner and I have kind of been going back and forth on is this idea that a lot of you might relate to, which is that every time I go to a conference, there's always an AI panel. Everybody's talking about AI, 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 and it's a buzzword. And the takeaways from those panels are always exactly the same thing. AI is going to get us a lot of efficiencies. you need to create an AI policy. You need to start planning strategically for how you're going to incorporate AI. It's all about like plan for next year, how you're going to work this into your roadmap and your budget, spend 2 years developing an AI policy. Like having all these building blocks in place is very important. But a lot of these talks and webinars and conferences don't actually tell you what's happening today and how people are actually using AI today and getting value, especially when it comes to sponsor banking side, the amount of work that it takes to risk review and monitor fintech partners. There's so much opportunity there. And not only is there a lot of opportunity that is coming our way, but I want to talk a bit about today what we are already seeing in the market and some of the best use cases that I've come across myself, not just what my company does, but in general, opportunities for AI to really actually do some work that could maybe benefit you guys today, not just next year in your kind of board planning meeting. Okay, great. So just I want to take a moment to kind of set the scene here. And I think this is something again that a lot of folks will resonate with. Something that we all, of course, know is that onboarding and monitoring fintech partners correctly is burdensome. There's kind of no two ways about it. It's burdensome on the personnel count, it's burdensome on the volume of work, regardless of how many partners you have. You cannot escape thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of policies, procedures, disclosures, audit reports, financials, both when you're doing that initial ongoing or initial kind of risk review and onboarding, or even in those periodic reviews. That workload never ends. In a lot of ways, it just continues to build. So we're just seeing like incredibly large amounts of manual reviews across teams. And the fact that this is manual is more serious than just the fact that it's not as efficient as it could be. I'm not a fan of people saying we need to bring in efficiency for the sake of efficiency or AI for the sake of AI. Like there's a deeper problem here that we are kind of bringing on by not figuring out how to modernize today. And so mapping out what we're seeing and what is resonating from some of the banks we work with are number one, it's risky. You know, let's say, you have a compliance analyst on your team who's responsible for reviewing 1,000 pages of a policy. There's no way they're reading every single line of every single page. There just isn't a way. And if you're finding a way to make sure your organization is reading every single line, that means that you're just taking an incredible amount of time and your business is going to move slowly. You're not going to be able to scale efficiently. So number one, most importantly, it's risky to do this stuff manually because nobody has typically the level of fine-toothed comb required to identify so many little details that kind of work together. Even I said, think about document review. It's not just about saying, oh, there's a deficiency with this BSA policy. It's even things like on page 700 of this policy, they say they do this, but on page 680 of this policy, they've updated it. They say they do this. So two different people reviewed them, and we don't know which one is actually the truth because both of them check the boxes in different ways, but they contradict each other. So there's so much risk that comes from having these kind of manual siloed reviews, and a lot of issues that we see traced down oftentimes to that. Another obvious one is just slowing down time to market. These partnerships are meant to increase deposits, realize revenue for the bank. And so, it of course slows it down. There's obviously this idea of teams spending hundreds of hours on inefficient work that they could be spending doing something more useful with their time that actually is something that they've been trained to do strategically instead of just looking for those needles in a haystack. And then, of course, the solution up until recently has been to just continue investing in staffing, throwing bodies at the problem to show regulators that, we're trying our best. We dedicated this much money to increase staffing this year, but that doesn't actually solve the problem. And then personally, worst of all, the legacy tech is not cutting it either because most of it is oftentimes not that much better than a very, very, very fancy spreadsheet because it's a place where you can input the work that you're doing, but it's not actually helping you do the work itself. Um, Tanner, anything to add on this piece? Just setting the
I
stage for the status quo.
I love this. So I remember, granted it was a long time ago, but I mean, I remember when everybody was kind of almost jaw on the ground just at the topic of monitoring and how much we all hadn't really been paying attention for a long, long time. And I mean, I know a lot of people on this call will remember when it was such a big deal that fintechs couldn't use the word bank, right? And that actually was a heck of a driver for this idea of like, oh, how do we even monitor that? And oh my gosh, we're supposed to be, and what are we actually doing, right? And so you definitely hit a nerve with me. I think You made a really good point on, even I think everybody thinks about automation and efficiency from, let's just call it money and scale, right? To your point. But the risk thing was a good one, right? And I think monitoring is such a good area to look at as a risk profile for you don't know what you're missing or duplicating efforts or anything you talked about. So I'm super on board. I think that was a really good point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, love it. And then as folks are watching this, if any little questions bubble up, we'll have plenty of time to
Yeah,
make it
throw them in the
question and
chat.
answer questions. So feel free to even drop them in the chat or kind of hold on to them for when we kind of open it up. So I'm just going to dive straight in. Enough theoretical talk. The rest of this webinar is going to be me actually outlining a couple key AI-ready use cases. I'm going to then call out 3 banks and describe exactly how they are using AI today to manage their fintech partners, and we're just going to go from there. And I
Awesome.
believe there are some folks from these banks that are even on this call today, so you'll see yourself, you know who you are. So okay, let's dive in. Where are we seeing AI-ready use cases today? And all of these, as you might imagine, map directly to where we're seeing the most manual, burdensome work that has maybe like 50% of the work is just so manual, and the other 50% is very critical and should likely always have, human expertise. But I want to focus on the first 50% that can truly just be reduced like today. So the first one is keeping track of regulatory changes. I mean, this idea of, your team having to monitor regulatory websites or use one of those regulatory alerting tools that gives you 1 million alerts per month that takes even more effort to sift through, that is not something that people should be spending time on anymore. So what we're seeing today is AI actually not just giving you this huge dump of what's changed, but actually using that in the context of documentation. So not just saying there's a new kind of change in the FFIEC examination manual, but actually saying, hey, in this fintech partner's BSA policy, this paragraph is now potentially non-compliant with the newest FFIEC examination manual. So not just what changed 100 times, but exactly how do those regulatory changes affect me? And AI can help bridge that gap. The other one is just generally this category of document review is something that we'll be emphasizing a lot because that a lot of times is the meat of these manual reviews. So everyone might relate to this idea of reviewing all these policies, procedures, disclosures, but it goes beyond that, right? This kind of review is beyond compliance. It touches infosec, it touches operational risk, it touches privacy, financials. All of those things at their building blocks are different SMEs, doing their risk assessments, getting answers to questionnaires and really reviewing documentation. And so what AI it will be and is already really strong at is actually reviewing all that documentation, identifying where there are issues, even moving on to the next one, even things like marketing material, automatically flagging UDAP violations. Hey, they forgot to say, banking services provided by X, they forgot to say FDIC. AI can just find things like trigger terms, automatically highlight when there's missing disclosures. All of those things are already fully automated today in practice. And there's not really a reason why large teams have to do this work anymore. Another really great one, if I think about honestly what moves the needle the most, it's probably that third bullet point, which is about completing risk assessments, questionnaires, and reporting. Even outside of BaaS, even if you think about just vendor risk reviews, this idea of having a SIG or these huge risk assessments where you have to check, do they have this control? Do they have this control? How do they do this? Do they do this? And how does it happen today? You have this, Excel spreadsheet with 500, 600 questions, and everyone has to just collaborate and say, okay, do they have this? Which attachment is it in? Do they have this? I forgot where I found it. I have to dig through all these documents again, open all of them, I'll open all of them up on my computer. Um, None of that is something that needs to be done anymore. Like instead, the way that we're seeing people flip it today is upload that entire set of documentation into kind of the tool that will do this kind of work well and upload your risk assessment and let AI really effectively point to where the answers are in the documentation. So this idea of searching over large amounts of documentation, um, it's it's not just something that will be obsolete. Like it's been obsolete for months now, and so it's something that you can just easily adopt today. Tanner, I think you had some to say.
I'm just thinking, I mean, I know I picked on efficiency and automation a minute ago, but as long as we're on that and the money side of that, I think it balances the scales over what we've seen, let's say the last 20 plus years, certainly since they changed branch banking laws, right? With the big guys getting so big. There's a lot of reason. I mean, as you're going through this, I got a big grin on my face thinking, man, being a nimble community bank, hey, right? All of a sudden, and not to mention for our fintech partners or, even for our customers, being able to lower our own costs lowers the costs for everybody and, opens up access. So anyway, I
Mhm.
thought that was it's got that entrepreneurial theme to it, man. That's really, really cool. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And even beyond just making these things faster, we try to think of, let's dive into what's happening today at your bank and figure out where are there unnecessary meetings? Where are people waiting for an SME to get back to them after 4 weeks of reviewing this one piece of the infosec packet? Like, can we even shrink that back and forth between teams down and get some of these initial risk assessments done from 6 weeks to under 2 weeks? Like those are real numbers that we're seeing today that people have already done. And it's entirely possible to do. You can have AI autofill 90% of a risk assessment and just have your partners or internal SMEs fill out the last 10% and fact check everything instantly with AI and get the
That,
citations as well.
that's becoming a big deal. I don't know if everybody's feeling it yet, right? There's a supply and demand issue with charters and sponsors. But as we're working our way through that, I'm definitely seeing there's some badass programs that are showing up that, I mean, I know nothing's a no-brainer and we need to do our risk assessment and check our boxes, but I mean, this is a no-brainer, right? And I've run into 4 or 5 of those in the last couple of months that go around to a number of banks. I'm like, any of those, surely, right? They'd all love to have you for sure. But the time value to get to a yes or a no, I think they're starting to actually, I've seen a couple of those go away. I didn't expect them to go because of the speed by which the bank got to a yes. Or
Mhm.
some of the others didn't get to a yes quickly enough. So funny enough, you might have a little bit of a competitive edge there in the future that I'm starting to see.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and I'm friends with so many folks on the fintech side as well who say, hey, everybody knows that this team at this bank is an absolute nightmare to work with because
Mhm.
they're going to ask you to answer 100,000 questions when the answer, like they already have access to that information. They're going to make you revalidate the same thing over and over when there's no point because they already have it. And that's a thing that people share that makes you avoid certain institutions because it's about their experience too. So we're trying to not just think about it in terms of how can this stuff help make things faster, but actually make everyone, you know, make the process maybe less dreadful in a lot of ways and remove a lot of the headache too.
Mhm.
And then kind of moving on to some of these, even things like reporting is such a hot topic because it's so critical. But oftentimes, if you're using tooling that has access to some of the right data in the first place, then it's actually not so complicated for AI to actually say, hey, here is the inventory of what we reviewed. Here are all the open issues. Here are all the risks that we've allowed. Here's all the kind of additional notes. And let AI kind of even generate some of those and even initial first drafts of reports like an analyst would so that teams can just get the ball rolling even faster. So we're seeing a lot of movement on reporting. That's been one of the bigger upticks that we're seeing, especially this month and the last basically this summer. And then the last two, there's so many amazing tools out there that even do work like complaints management. There's so many, even the task of reviewing, complaints logs and things like that. There's so much data to sift through that AI can really do a nice job of pointing you to where you need to spend extra time looking at and shielding you away from, all of this data is exactly the same. Focus on this specific trend that we're seeing, that kind of thing that doesn't just treat all data as the same, because then it'll just take kind of forever to go through. And
Yep.
then lastly, a lot of amazing work that I'm seeing in the industry and around dispute resolution. So for each of these bullet points, I can name an incredible tool that does this really well. So it's not theoretical. And if you guys want to get some names, happy to provide them. But these are all tools that are in the market today that are being used and seeing really great results. So moving
I
on.
got one in the
Yeah, go
chat.
ahead.
Just a quick one in the chat, asking if we touch a little bit more on regulatory. And
Sure.
one of the things that really came to my mind is, having watched enough of this, I'm not exactly the old guy, but seen quite a bit now. And watching these regulatory cycles, especially with something that's a little bit new, it tends to be a little more stick than carrot, right? In terms of the order of operations. And in lieu of guidance, a lot of times we have wonderful consent orders to look at, right? And so I was thinking about that as it's something I track really hard. I'm the nerd that goes through and reads each consent order, right? And I kind of have a rolling catalog in my head of things that should be guidance that aren't, right? And I was thinking about that. Is that an area that you could play in of, I mean, could you just compile consent orders and be a little bit ahead of the curve?
Oh, 100%. And even in terms of like predictive analytics, like, hey, this
Mhm.
bank very similar to you, with a similar sized, deposit program with similar fintechs just got dinged for this thing. We're gonna notify you and maybe talk about how that might potentially affect you. If you have the same regulator, then you might be affected by the same politics going on. So yeah, I mean, a lot of tools that we're one of the tools that does that too, where you can all of this stuff is publicly available, which is so interesting. Like if a human being can look it up and read the consent order, so can AI. So, our team is also kind of nerds like that, like you, Tanner, like reading it ourselves. But we also have our AIs ingesting every single, not just regulation, not just consent order and enforcement action, but even every single like bulletin that comes out, every single piece of guidance, the back and forth around proposed rules, like all of those are, if you put it all together, you can actually start to see a bit of a picture emerge that can help you potentially avoid some disasters. The
Love it.
data is all there.
Yeah, we're talking about a future where I don't have to be smart. I just have to know how dumb I am, right? This is awesome.
Totally.
I would have
Totally.
been way better if we'd had this a long time ago. This is great.
Yeah, totally. And even as we think about, and I'll get to this, but I'll have a slide about what makes, like, how should you even decide between AI tools that seem to do similar things? And part of this is how much context can it give you about its decisions? Like, hey, this is an issue. Why is it an issue? Here's what the reg says. Here's what a recent consent order says. Here's what your regulator says. So that is what is so much of risk and compliance is like, what do you do in the gray area? So everyone always says, oh, there's no way that AI can operate in that gray area. It's only ever going to be one size fits all. That's not true anymore. That was maybe true 2 years ago, but AI is already able to say, hey, your regulator says this. Here's how it might specifically apply to you. So some of those gray area arguments are not even quite as accurate anymore.
Yeah, I'm like you. I play with some of the nerdy new models, and you get to a point where it's like I'm looking around, like this thing knows me, man. Like we're at a deep level. Wow, we're
Oh
really
yeah.
good.
Even things like, hey, this is something that you seem to be accepting as part of your risk appetite.
Yeah.
Or all of a sudden, hey, here's something where you always seem to have escalated this. All of a sudden, you're okay with it. There's been a change in your behavior. Things like that, that only a tool that has this like bird's eye view of how you're acting is going to be able to really show.
Yeah, really cool.
Cool. So coming up next, I'm gonna call out a couple institutions that have done a really good job
Just a
evaluating
couple of rock stars, no big
and
deal.
yeah, evaluating and thinking about how to use AI. So feel free to, I mean, there are folks at I think at least two of these banks on this call, and all of them have done a really good job being early adopters of AI and being the ones to really show how it's been useful. So I can walk you through a couple examples, but I want to first talk about between Celtic, Emprise, and Lincoln Savings, how have all three banks had something in common with how they used AI? Even before their use case, the first thing that comes to mind when I think about what these three have in common is actually in terms of leadership. When I meet certain banks, oftentimes I hear a lot, hey, this is really great. We need to figure out how this might fit into our AI strategy. Let's talk again in winter 2027. I hear things like that all the time. But, when I've met at all three of these banks, you know, we've met leadership and they've said, hey, this is something that's coming at us really quickly. I want to see it. I don't just want to talk about it in our planning session. Show it to me. Let me try it out. Let my team try it out. And if it works really well, we'll give it a chance. So I think that's what has really differentiated some of the more like innovative institutions from not the ones that are saying, let me play with it. I'm not going to make a commitment to you, but like put it in our team's hands. Let us see if it really works.
Yep.
And
I,
then
I
you have all the
I
information
cannot
you need.
echo that enough. I would say one of the biggest reasons why I do so much here and play with all of these folks, and most of the folks in this call and in this area of our space are my friends, is because it's exciting. They're entrepreneurs, right? Or that mindset.
Mm.
And it is an interesting problem. And I think it's actually one you're tackling. how do we handle this old, tired, slow-moving monster of
Mhm.
regulatory, right, and everything else, and all the technology, and still move fast and think nimble? It is a heck of a problem to solve, and there's damn sure a cool crowd of people right now that are working on it.
Yeah, they're there. And I generally think, banks that are already involved in embedded finance are already more likely to be innovative. I think that's like a fair thing to say, which is why this space is also so exciting because there's folks that are already willing to do something interesting and push
Mhm.
things forward. Even
If
like
you're a banker with a Maserati, there's a 95% chance you're a BaaS bank. Yeah, I agree.
yeah, totally, totally, totally. Yeah, even especially calling out folks from Emprise, I met the CEO one day last year in DC. Within 1 week, he said, "Take my card. Like, somebody has to learn more about this." So that kind of velocity is something that really stands out, and where you can tell that the program is gonna do really well because they're being thorough about the options available to them. But okay, so zooming back out a little bit, I called out three, and there's so many more that have been doing a great job, really seeing value today with AI, but I especially wanted to call out these three. So how are Celtic, Lincoln Savings, and Emprise all using AI today as part of some of the tooling, especially when it comes to monitoring fintech partners, also vendors, even internal compliance materials? So, and some of these might be redundant, but this is really just the crystal clear use cases that I think would be the right place to start when it comes to the back office operations and risk and compliance most primed for AI acceleration. Number one, taking all those fintech partner policies, procedures, before anyone reviews them, all three of these banks run it through a specific AI tool for compliance and are actually identifying where there are gaps. And then folks on the team are digging into it, creating issues from those, and using that as a springboard, but always having that baseline check to make sure that really critical issues are not missed. And more importantly, any regulatory updates are captured. All three of these banks are using AI to dig through thousands of pages to identify and confirm where key controls are and aren't missing. And I can even show you some screenshots of ways that this kind of stuff can be done. All three of these banks are using AI to autofill questionnaires and start accelerating the risk assessment process so fewer people have to be involved, or it can be done in a way that's even more accurate. And interestingly enough, for some of these, oftentimes if we think about the way questionnaires are oftentimes done today with external parties, is you get all their information, you send them 1,000 questions to answer. But we've actually seen a flip in the order of how this is being done today when it comes to third-party risk management, which is, you have, your partner or your vendor's documentation. First, use that to fill out your questionnaire, and then only take the ones that couldn't be answered with AI and send it back to the vendor to answer, or at least send all of it back for them to confirm, which answers are correct. And if they aren't correct, that means the documentation needs to be updated. So we've seen this flip and almost elimination of the traditional questionnaire process. That's cut down total questionnaire risk assessment time by literally over 80%, the second this kind of tech is used.
I used to do that a long, long time ago when I was at Malazai and I had relationship management. I would get like 600 or 700 banks and credit unions pounce on me each year, right? I mean, similar process, right? But all the normal things and then the oddities that would pop up. And sure enough,
Mhm.
about the time you think you're ready for it, I wasn't always. So it's a really
Mhm.
good point.
Yeah, it's a big one. And on the other side of the coin, I'm also someone who is responsible. My team has to fill out so many of these, and we use AI for all of it too. So, there's no chance that we would spend, 4 hours going through something like this when we could instead just quickly validate every single answer our AI generates here. And then even going beyond, the first three kind of talk about what are ways that AI can take a currently human process and accelerate it. The fourth bullet point is very interesting because it's something that is actually flips the script of humans being not humans. That's a very like robotic thing to say, but like kind of your team looking to see, hey, what are there any material kind of adverse media updates or any specific alerts I should know about my partners? Instead of looking for it, I think we live in a world where that information can come to you. So even things like, hey, can AI alert me when one of my partners or one of my vendors has a security breach? It already can today. And there are some amazing tools that do that. Or can AI alert me if an investigation opens up on one of my fintech partners that I didn't know about? Or if I'm even considering a prospective fintech to partner with, can AI alert me if there's any interesting legal filings or regulatory issues that pop up after my initial approval of them? All that stuff is something that these three banks have implemented today, where they get auto notified if any of their partners have any kind of negative news that AI is able to find online. It's been pretty
Wow.
cool.
That's
Yeah.
wild. I've started to see, for us on the FedFiz side with the data, a lot of banks coming to us for data on various potential partners, and to your point, situational changes and things like that that come up. And so even as we're seeing that bottleneck for sponsors, everybody's after the badass partners, right? And
Hmm.
beginning to fight over them a little bit more. And I think to
Hmm.
your point, these efficiencies and things amongst the team, kind of a brand, so to
Hmm.
speak, right? So that you're not known in certain circles as being the slow or the tired old bank, or right. It's
Hmm.
cool to watch this evolution. It's starting to mature for sure.
Yeah, totally. It's starting to completely transform, and it's cool to see everyone feel the weight of some of this work. It's not that the weight is off their shoulders in the sense that their burden is outsourced, or their regulatory, obligations are outsourced, but it's like the weight of wondering if you missed anything. That goes away. And even that peace of mind that lets you focus on, okay, now that we've checked this box and we know this box is checked, we can just move on and not have to have another meeting of 10 people. So we're actually just seeing this like density of how quickly things are being done, which is super cool to see. Because I think, when we first started deploying this kind of tech, initially we're like, okay, how long will it take to be able to point to specific results? And it was cool to see that even very quickly, you could say, hey, on day one, this thing that I had to do, it usually takes me 3 hours. I found out a way to get it done in 30 minutes. Like that was insane. Like hearing stuff like that, it can just scale so amazingly, which is amazing to hear.
Really
Um,
cool. You want
so
to take a couple of questions real quick?
sure, yeah.
All right, I got one from Matt. It says, as a banker who's lost countless brain cells sitting through risk assessments and lost hours of my life, I love this. Would love to know how this being introduced into the workplace would reduce the fear of me losing my job to this, and instead enhancing my job.
Yeah, no, that we hear that a lot. I think, well, interestingly, as we think about where AI becomes useful as some of this work, at the end of the day, the regulators are only really going to look positively on your team using AI if it's being leveraged as a tool that's making you better at your job.
Yep.
So there's never going to be a tool that alleviates that burden of like like if you make a mistake, that's on you. Like even if you use an AI tool, you cannot point and say this AI tool made a mistake unless, maybe a world in which like AI insurance comes up, things like that. But in this day and age, like it's still on you. But what a good AI tool can do for you is help you avoid that second layer. So like there always will need to be a human in the loop to validate it, to make that final decision. But the first, 60, 70% of the work of saying, where can I find the control? That's something AI can detect. And then let's say AI outputs, hey, we found the control, but it's only maybe 50% sufficient. That's how far AI can go. And then where someone like you, Matt, comes in is you say, okay, it's 50% sufficient. What do we do now? Is this within our risk appetite? Should we be having this conversation? How should we massage this to either mitigate the issue, get to a strategic yes, find a creative solution? So there's never going to be a world in which there isn't a human component here, but you basically just get to spend more of your time doing the interesting decision-making work rather than, like you said, losing brain cells over the stuff that just no one wants to do.
It's a great call.
Yeah.
I've never in my life seen the rule has to be followed that great technology makes the people go further. And
Mhm.
anytime I've tried to get anywhere near breaking that, it's blown up in my face. So I couldn't agree
Mhm.
more. Uh, all right, here's a tough one for you. From somebody who's clearly listening. Uh, so don't feel the need to answer this live, they say, but they're curious, how's Cobalt different than just uploading documents to ChatGPT to compare and find things?
Oh,
My
I'm happy to answer that.
privacy is important, but go ahead.
Yeah, the privacy is, I think, even a cop-out answer. So that's an obvious one, but I think that's still insufficient because perhaps you have an Azure deployment at the bank and feel as though you have your own virtual private cloud. We've done so many analytics here, and the reason why, not to make it too much about Cobalt, but like the reason why we started this company is because there's such a big difference between an AI tool and an AI tool that actually is something you can rely on and like works well with your flow, And I think there's a chasm there and there's a couple big differences there. Number one, the amount of research it takes to mitigate the amount of hallucinations and specifically align accuracy with risk and compliance workflows was 2 years of development in and of itself. How do we just make it accurate for compliance folks? Like that in itself is like a team of 50 people just working on that. You know what I mean? And then there's another problem of how do you actually take something, integrate it with the other relevant GRC tools? How do you pull from the right data sources? How do you facilitate, you click this button, it'll autofill, it'll take the results of your inherent risk assessment, automatically ask your external party to upload these materials. Once it gets uploaded, fill out the risk assessment, and then ping each SME to do their review. All of that like orchestration of work goes so much more beyond a chatbot that I think when people think AI just means a chatbot, they're forgetting that AI can heal itself, it can cite itself, it can actually send the right folks to the right people. It's like a full product. And I think that's what we're missing. So many of these legacy SaaS tools are the product without the AI, or they try to introduce AI and it doesn't work that well because they don't have the scientific expertise there. Or it's purely just these AI chatbots and models that work super well, but there's still a lot of work to take that and bake it into your process and make it really transparent and auditable. So there's just such an opportunity there for something in the middle that actually just works. My favorite thing I love to do when banks ask me this is, and feel free, whoever you are, to take me up on this. I always say, don't listen to me and let the results speak for themselves. I always say, test out a couple AI tools and compare which one actually solves your problem accurately. And ultimately, the proof is just always in the pudding.
That's awesome. All right, I got one more for you from Lee. What's up, Lee? How much work time is involved in getting the data ready for using AI? It seems like that's a big obstacle. Most banks don't even have a data lake. So I'll tell you this, one thing I've been telling banks for a long time is basically, before we have an AI conversation, get AI ready, right? Play the data side. There's so much even in our own shop that I haven't done, but I've been listening internally and externally and cataloging for like 7 years. I have no idea what I'm going to do with all the shit that I've collected, but it is structured and beautiful. So one day I'll figure out what
Oh,
to do,
yeah.
right? And maybe you'll help me,
That's
but
going to be a gold mine one day. We'll talk later
got
about
it.
that.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so about the data lake, and I think that really goes into why I specifically highlighted these use cases. This is a small list of all the opportunities there are within AI. Like if you're looking for an AI tool that's going to actually analyze, specific, historical records of data, or, all of your fraud alerts, or all of your SAR filings, etc., that requires a deeper engineering implementation and it requires very nicely structured data sets, whether you're using Snowflake or whatever else to work well. The reason why I'm citing these use cases is because they actually don't require AI to go into the data. Like if you look at what I'm looking at here, if you have AI that's reviewing documentation, all you need to do is get those policies and documents into the platform. You don't need a data lake, and that's why I always like recommend starting with tools that have, under a 1 to 2 week engineering implementation standpoint, or even no engineering lift at all, because that's how you're going to get just like immediate value. So I guess speaking for these use cases, speaking for what we do, there's no data kind of configuration required. As you go deeper into AI for customer support or things like that, then that's absolutely where you need to spend some time really digging into how to place everything out. But I think everyone always thinks that to get value from any AI, you have to go through that whole process, but there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in the back office that doesn't need to touch any data, like stuff like this.
Well said. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, great. And then one more thing I wanted to mention actually, a question that I suspect may come up, which comes up typically in some of these kinds of talks, which is, what do regulators think about banks using some of this kind of tooling to augment some of the like very critical work that they're doing. So I already touched on how, I mean, I've spoken to so many regulators and I always hear as long as, this is showing that it's making them better, you're not taking away any of their burden and their responsibilities to show how AI is making them better. There's no problem here as long as, the data privacy is a core element, but kind of out of scope for this immediate slide. And the other piece of it is another misconception. People always think AI isn't here yet. Regulators are afraid of it. There are 3 state regulators that I am currently helping to add AI into their review and examination process. So if you think every regulator is super afraid of AI and they don't want to touch it, that's actually just wrong. I know who they are, and they're actively testing it today.
I
Because if you think about it from their perspective, the way some of these exams work is they come in and they can only look at 10% of a sample, or a sample that's 10%. They don't have the bandwidth to look at everything. So they're trying to find ways to, can we look at everything, use AI to pick out the right samples that kind of flag issues. Now that
we've
might that
learned
might
that.
make some of you scared, but that's what they're already doing today.
So we have a little bit more than half of the regulators that we work with as that are customers. And so for years now on the financial side, right? We've built models and rating systems to help them look at exams, right? And things, hey, if we see a problem, right? So they can begin to kind of forecast and look forward. And I've been hearing the same thing you're talking about from them of using AI to think the same way. So I
Yeah.
can confirm that is really cool.
Yeah, no, they're surprisingly open about it, more than I would have expected. And it also depends on, the relationship you have with your regulators. Like when we first implemented with Lincoln Savings Bank, they brought us in. I think they're regulated by the Iowa Division of Banking and I believe the Kansas FDIC. We had a three-way conversation between the bank, my team, and the regulators to say, let's actually flesh out all of your worries. So as long as you're kind of being transparent about it, there's nothing inherently wrong with being innovative.
Cool.
Yeah. And then, so what I want to do was bring a quick bit of a visual, pulling from some different AI tools about how AI can actually bring value in a way that, again, I'm trying to make this as minimally theoretical as possible. So let's look at an example after learning it. Here's a quick one where, as you can see here, okay, so let me point you to the left-hand side here, here's a quick example of a little questionnaire or risk assessment. It can be either one. Tools like this support both. It's asking things like, does business continuity testing occur annually? What are employee responsibilities during a disaster event? This is an example of AI actually filling it out. But more importantly, if you're using the right AI tool, it's going to give you citations about where it can find it. So the way that we've designed it is, you can click on the citation and it can actually dig through all the documents, open up the correct document, and highlight where it found the answer. So if you're looking for how do we evaluate AI tools, something I'd really recommend is make sure that it's one that validates its work in front of you and doesn't make you spend so much time validating it, you might as well have done it yourself. Because if you look on the left-hand side, if it says these are the employee responsibilities during a disaster event, if you want to validate what the AI says, you would have to go in, figure out where the answer is, read it yourself. You already did it yourself. So the right AI tool will say, I'm going to point to exactly where I found the answer so that it's instant to verify. You don't even have to trust me. So this idea of uh, in like the infosec world, there's this idea of trust but verify. I think with these kinds of tools, it should be the opposite, which is don't trust but like verify instantly. So that's where you get this like human AI collaboration. So just wanted to show a quick example there, and another quick example, an idea of something AI might be able to say. I brought up, this idea of finding potential issues with kind of BSA policies and procedures. So I thought I'd make it even visual. Something AI can even do is say, hey, we're flagging an issue, against this regulatory requirement. We found insufficient detail on your fintech partner's OFAC screening procedures. So before the BSA team even looks at a partner's policies and procedures, run it through an AI tool and actually just let AI do some of that work. And there's a couple tools that do stuff like this really, really well. Um, I won't talk too much about the impact. That gets into theoretical land, actually, and I think we all know why this would be valuable and impactful. And again, I want to kind of I believe this is the last slide before we go into questions and open conversation, but just want to leave with this. I think the thing that people always get really scared about is AI seems to work really well in demos. is it going to work for me in real life? And I think that your instinct is correct when you think this. I've tried literally hundreds of AI tools, and many of them break down the second they're faced with any complexity or any kind of gray area that's not a perfect example that's shown in the demo. So not all AI is created equal, and fancy demos don't guarantee real life results. Um, I want to take you to this very last bullet point here, which is as you're thinking about how do we bring in tech, how do we even decide where to start, what tooling? I would say when it comes to AI, of course, references are important, but I actually think that this kind of stuff, as long as it's kind of lightweight, if there's sandboxes, don't buy before you try. You know, make sure the tools you're looking at say, hey, your demo looks great. Test it on my materials. Let's get an NDA in place. Let's do kind of a quick infosec review in place, or even send some redacted documentation and see how it works on my data that I already know the right answer for. So I would definitely say if you're looking to figure out what tooling is the right to select, if a tool is not able to let you test before you buy, I would say that's a red flag. But I would say that shouldn't make you afraid of AI in general. There's so many tools out there that really have a good job of doing what they say they do. So it's just about weeding those out from the others, which can be intimidating, but there's so many great resources to figure it out.
That's awesome. I first want to kind of commend and thanks for not giving the sales pitch. I actually think you did a wonderful sales pitch, by the way, but you went out of your way not to pitch yourself, and you're clearly the expert. So thank you for that. I know everybody appreciated it. Classy move. Uh, I really like everything that you talk about from where everything is at, right? Less about where it's headed, but where we're actually at. And I think there was actually a number of points there that you made that woke my ass up. I was like, wow, it's like every day I'm further and further realizing that we're actually where I thought we were heading and maybe even further. And we're actually there yesterday, So that was really cool to wake up to some of those. And I think, especially the regulatory side and especially with the application of this BaaS and embedded realm, oh my gosh, the amount of change, right? And I don't think, I mean, I won't say any banker on this call is average by far, but the average damn sure has no idea of the pace of change and where we're actually at. It's a little bit of a tragedy, but you're far ahead of the rest of us. So way to go.
No, it's exciting. It's exciting. There's so much more, and I think as more people learn about what's possible, then there's going to be even more that's possible. Like it's just there's so much you can do, but there's so much that I'm excited for that will be possible even in 6 months from now. That's almost the rate of my thinking. Like
Yeah.
there's all these things that I want AI to be able to do that it can't do today, but we're working on it. So like next year it'll be possible, you know.
Yeah. Let me ask you, so what other areas, I mean, obviously a big focus for you guys on regulatory compliance, et cetera, which, I mean, is such a massive undertaking, right? I mean, you talk about scale, you picked a spot. That was a good one. What other sort of areas or arenas? I mean, there's so much that touches that realm, right, within the bank. What else are you thinking about? Or it doesn't have to be things you're planning on, but what else is of interest to you that's a big area to be played with?
A big area where we're investing a lot of resources in and where I'm seeing still a gap in the market is probably on the reporting side. I think there's even if we just zoom in a little bit to AI tools, it's like AI finds certain issues, AI does this task, and then everybody says, okay, so then what? You know,
Right.
AI found an issue, what do I do next? Do I alert somebody? Do I write it down in another tool? Do I export it? And so I think if we think about where some of these tools are evolving even more, it's how do we actually summarize all the findings, send it to the right person, facilitate communication, generate some of those deliverables for committee meetings, or some of those board reports that we know just take forever, but are super important and kind of critical to this kind of transparency. So working a lot on like communication and reporting, which is as important as getting it right in the first place, I think. You know,
Yeah,
some
I've
transparency.
long thought, you look at these different departments. I mean, we're very siloed. I mean,
Mm,
not even just in banking or in technology. I mean, it feels like the whole world is getting more siloed and more vertical, right?
mhm,
And I think a lot of what you talked about today just grabbed me in the thinking that
mhm.
we're heading towards a place where there's something smarter than all of us that could be the mesh to sit on top and begin to, right?
Exactly.
not only to your point, be able to report and see between the different silos, but actually begin to move things, right? And
Mhm.
decision. That's
Totally.
really, really exciting because that's probably our biggest problem in banking, at least
Mhm.
from a technology standpoint, right? I mean, look, to even, I think to Lee's point about data, to even begin to tackle the data question, you have to get into the sourcing question, which is into the silo question, which is a
Mhm.
jillion part to the 10th power answer in every bank you walk into, right? It's not an easy solve. There's just fragmented data everywhere. So I
Mhm.
think you're really what's funny is from the regulatory and the compliance side of the world, you're actually taking what is a massive and constantly changing data set, right? That then
Mhm.
you're actioning and decisioning and doing all the cool and beginning to report on. Now,
Yeah.
if we could get all of the data everywhere else in clean order, you'd be able to put us in a really cool spot. So
Yeah, totally. It's just the start. And even if I think about data is still so fragmented, like even Lee, hey Lee, I know Lee, and even the work that Lee's doing is like super critical because he's a little bit deeper into that world of data and like identity, which is a whole gnarly problem in itself, you know?
you bet. All right. Well, I want to say super duper thank you. I had a ball if you couldn't tell. Sorry, I nerded out a couple of times there. I think everybody else did too. Super awesome to have you. Thanks everybody for being here. And I sure enjoy these. Hope everybody else does too. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody again soon.